Thunder rolled over Ukuta as the baobab trembled, and Amara said, "The air tastes of iron and grief." Mama Ebele leaned on her staff and said, "Child, the ancestors stir." The calabash heirloom cracked with a scream that was not sound. Blue fire leapt, carved masks wept, and ashes spiraled like birds. Jabari seized Amara's arm and said, "Stand behind me." The ground shivered as a wind slithered through huts like a snake. Mama Ebele said, "A vow was broken before you were born." A shadow crossed the moon, and the drumbeat died mid-pulse. Amara said, "Who broke it, Mama?" The elder's eyes turned glassy as if the river rose inside them. She whispered, "Blood calls blood," and the calabash shattered. A gust blew the beads from Amara's braid, and she tasted salt and smoke. Jabari said, "Name the danger, and I will cut it down." The shadow formed a face with gold in its smile. Mama Ebele fell to her knees and said, "Obasi has fed the curse." Lightning split the sky, and the village dogs wailed. The elder exhaled a thread of song, thin as dawn, and the song broke. Dawn crawled into Ukuta like a wounded bird, and Amara said, "Her song snapped in my hands." Jabari cleaned rain from his spear and said, "Name what I must fight." The hut smelled of ash and salt, and silence pressed the roof down. Mama Ebele lay on a mat, eyes open to storms that only she could see. She whispered, "Blood oaths do not sleep." Amara traced the broken beads and said, "Obasi lives in smoke and rumor." Kato lingered at the doorway and said, "Cousin, the elders blame you." Shame flickered in his gaze like a moth at flame. Jabari said, "Let them blame the thunder, not the tree it strikes." Mama Ebele coughed and said, "The shrine is lost because a path was sold." The words fell heavy, like stones in a riverbed. Amara said, "Show me the path, and I will walk it." The elders stared at the ceiling, where soot mapped forgotten constellations. She said, "First, you must bind fear to your ankle like a bell, so it warns you before it rules you." Smoke from bitter herbs spiraled as Mama Ebele said, "The gods sealed a road with names your mother kept hidden." Amara said, "She died before I learned even one." The elder's palm traced circles on the floor, and ash answered like stars. Jabari said, "Say the names or point, and we march." Mama Ebele smiled and said, "Strength without roots is a storm that forgets the soil." She placed a shell on Amara's palm, cool as dawn. Amara said, "My hands shake, but they are not empty." The shell hummed, and the hut seemed to lean closer. Mama Ebele said, "Go to the river bend where stones sing underwater." Kato said, "Elders whisper that Obasi brings new order." Jabari said, "Order without mercy is a cage." Amara breathed the herb smoke, and felt a door unlock behind her ribs. She said, "If the road is sealed, I will learn the key by walking." The plaza filled with murmurs as elders circled like wary cranes. Elder drums lay silent, and Amara said, "I will seek the river bend." A woman clutched a baby and said, "Bring back our mornings." Jabari said, "No storm lasts when a blade stands in its eye." Kato said, "Some storms are invited." Eyes turned to him like knives in cloth. Mama Ebele walked slowly and said, "Let the young carry old promises." She raised her staff, and the dust held its breath. An elder said, "Obasi offers grain and iron." Amara said, "He pays with our names." The crowd shivered as wind braided through the baobab. A boy tugged Amara's wrapper and said, "Will you return?" She knelt and said, "I will return or leave a path so bright you can follow." Packing was a quiet thunder, and Amara said, "I will carry the shell and the song she left unfinished." Jabari strapped on his bracers and said, "I carry you whether you need it or not." Mama Ebele tied a red thread to Amara's wrist and said, "This thread remembers when you forget." Kato hovered and said, "If roads split, do not choose the one that forgets family." Amara held his eyes and felt the heat of old games played under mango shade. She said, "Walk with us or wish us strength." He looked away and said, "Strength, then." The sky cleared to a hard blue, and the baobab threw a long road of shadow. Amara stepped into it and said, "Let my feet speak to the gods before my mouth does." The village watched as if watching the past depart on borrowed legs. Amara walked along the red earth road as cicadas screamed, and she said, "Each step feels like a drumbeat carrying a name I do not know." Jabari marched beside her and said, "A name will come when your courage earns it." The cowrie shell warmed in her palm, and she felt her mother's voice humming like a buried river. Mama Ebele's words, repeated, "Blood oaths do not sleep." Cato trailed a few steps back, his silence sharp as broken pottery. He said, "Elders say your birth was written in a storm that drowned 7 fields." Amara turned and said, "If the storm chose me, let it watch me walk." The baobab forest bent overhead, branches twisting like arms of forgotten spirits. Jabari said, "I will cut down any shadow that names itself enemy." Amara smiled faintly and said, "Courage cannot cut curses, but it can hold me steady." The air thickened with smoke, and a crow shrieked from nowhere. Cato muttered, "Prophecies favor only those who survive their first truth." The path narrowed by the river bend, and Jabari said, "Hear the stones sing, just as she promised." The water shimmered, carrying whispers that curled around their ankles. Amara crouched and said, "Each note feels like my bones answering." She dropped the shell and it rang like iron struck. Cato said, "Songs belong to the dead, meddling wakes them angry." Amara looked at him and said, "The dead carried us here." The river surged, and foam shaped itself into symbols. Jabari said, "The river speaks in swords, and I hear its edge." Amara's eyes burned with tears as she said, "I hear my mother, I hear all of them." The wind shifted, and branches bowed. Cato turned his gaze away and muttered, "Then the curse already owns your heart." Amara stood and said, "If it owns me, I will use it before it eats me." Torches glowed in the village square as the council gathered. Elder Kofi said, "Obasi brings iron and bread, while you bring storms." Amara stood firm and said, "Storms cleanse what is poisoned." Jabari's hand rested near his spear, but his eyes burned more fiercely than flame. Mama Ebele leaned on her staff and said, "Obasi feeds on names. Once swallowed, they are never spoken again." The crowd stirred, hunger and fear sharpening their voices. Cato said, "Is iron not worth the price of one forgotten name?" Amara turned on him and said, "Would you trade your own name so cheaply?" Silence spread, heavy as smoke. Elder Kofi's jaw tightened and he said, "Your path may bring ruin before it brings salvation." Amara said, "Then ruin will know me first." The torches hissed as if agreeing. At midnight, the drums woke the night, though no hands touched them. Amara said, "The ancestors strike without drummers." Jabari's eyes widened and he said, "Their warning tastes of blood." The moon burned red, washing the earth in rust. Mama Ebele lifted her staff and said, "A vow broken summons its keeper." Smoke rose from the soil, forming shapes of faces that mourned. Cato trembled and said, "I did not ask to walk this nightmare." Amara said, "But you walk it with me all the same." The air hummed until bones ached, and sparks lit their footprints. A shadowed figure appeared beyond the drums and Jabari said, "Name yourself." The figure laughed, and silence shattered. Mama Ebele whispered, "The shrine cries for its guardian." Amara clenched the shell and said, "Then let it cry into my hands." Dawn returned pale and reluctant. The village hushed like a graveyard. Amara said, "The path is no longer choice. It is wound in duty." Jabari strapped his pack tighter and said, "Then we bleed until it heals." Mama Ebele pressed dried herbs into Amara's hand and said, "Let them burn when despair thickens. Their smoke will courage back." Cato lingered at the edge, eyes restless, and said, "The shrine is a myth, a cage for fools." Amara walked toward him, her shadow long, and said, "Then call me fool when I return." He turned away, voice brittle, "Or curse when you do not." The wind stirred, and the baobab's roots cracked the soil as if guiding. Mama Ebele whispered, "The shrine breathes again." Amara tightened her grip on the shell and stepped beyond the fields, each stride a vow. The forest swallowed the sun as Amara stepped into shadows thick with whispers. She said, "Even the air knows fear." Jabari cut vines aside and said, "Fear bows to steel." The shell in Amara's palm pulsed like a heartbeat. Birds scattered, their cries sharp as knives. A shape slithered, unseen but heavy, coiling through undergrowth. Kato muttered, "This trial stinks of graves." Amara steadied her breath and said, "Graves are doors if you carry the right key." A serpent, black as night with gold eyes, uncoiled and hissed. Jabari raised his spear and said, "The first test speaks in fangs." Amara lifted her chin and said, "No beast strikes without memory. It remembers who trespassed." The serpent lunged, dust rising like smoke. Jabari shouted, "Stay behind me." Amara said, "No, beside you." Her voice rang, binding courage to the earth beneath them. The serpent's strike split branches, and Jabari thrust his spear with fury. Amara whispered, "Guide my hand, ancestors." She pressed the shell against the earth, and light spilled outward. Kato gasped, "The ground burns with her bloodline." The serpent writhed as the soil glowed, its hiss like thunder. Jabari said, "Your name bends the beast's breath." Amara's voice grew louder, "I am not trespasser. I am heir." The serpent froze, eyes dimming, and lowered its head. Kato muttered, "It kneels, but not for long." Amara touched its scaled brow and said, "Then let it remember me as keeper, not prey." The forest calmed, wind pausing as though listening. Jabari lowered his spear and said, "You bent shadow with song." Amara said, "The song bent me first." Back in the village council hut, elders argued with voices sharp as broken clay. Elder Kofi said, "You stir old spirits that should rest." Amara stood unshaken and said, "Rest is not peace when chains bind their names." Jabari stood near her shoulder like a wall. Mama Ebele said, "Her path is lit by what you fear to name." Kato's voice cracked, "Perhaps fear keeps us alive." An elder slammed his staff and said, "Obasi offers order, not chaos." Amara's gaze burned, and she said, "His order steals the root to feed the branch." The hut trembled as thunder rolled, though skies were clear. Mama Ebele's eyes narrowed, even the sky listens to her defiance. Silence followed, thick with unease. Jabari said, "Let fear sit outside, and let courage speak here." Storm clouds gathered above Ukuta, though no rain fell. Amara walked alone toward the river, heart heavy. She said, "Every victory births a deeper wound." Jabari called after her, "Do not carry it alone." She turned and said, "It clings whether I carry or not." The river mirrored her face, fractured by ripples. Kato appeared, voice low, "You court death by naming yourself heir." Amara said, "Death has courted me since birth." Lightning split the horizon without thunder. She fell to her knees, whispering, "Mother, how did you walk this path?" Silence answered. Jabari knelt beside her and said, "If the silence weighs too much, share it with me." Tears streaked Amara's cheeks, and she said, "Even silence has teeth." Night fell heavy when Mama Ebele sat before Amara, her staff glowing faintly in firelight. She said, "The serpent bent not to power, but to recognition." Amara said, "Recognition feels heavier than power." Jabari leaned against the wall, silent, watching her with unyielding loyalty. Mama Ebele said, "You must learn the shrine's trials are not for strength, but for surrender." Kato said, "Surrender is weakness." Mama Ebele's eyes burned. "It is weakness that births wisdom." Amara said, "If surrender is demanded, then I must surrender and still remain whole." The hut filled with smoke from burning herbs, carrying scents of earth and rain. Mama Ebele whispered, "Your ancestors sing louder when you listen instead of speak." Amara lowered her eyes and said, "Then teach me silence." The night air cut sharp as Amara found Kato by the riverbank, his shadow trembling with anger. He said, "I am your blood, yet they see only you," Amara said. The shrine chose a voice, not a rivalry. Kato's fists clenched as if holding broken dreams. Jabari stepped from the trees and said, "Jealousy feeds the enemy faster than hunger." Kato's eyes flared. "I will not bow to her destiny." Amara whispered, "This path is heavy, but I carry it for all of us." His laughter rang bitter. "All of us? Or only you?" The river shimmered with moonlight, like silver knives. Amara said, "I would rather bleed with you beside me than walk crowned and alone." He turned away, muttering, "Obasi listens where you do not." The village plaza echoed with Obasi's voice, carried on drums no hands touched. He declared, "I bring grain, iron, and power." Elders leaned forward, eyes gleaming. Amara said, "You trade life for chains." Jabari gripped his spear and whispered, "His tongue drips poison." Kato stood at the edge of the crowd, his face torn between loyalty and ambition. Obasi's figure rose tall in smoke and flame, his eyes like molten gold. He said, "The shrine belongs to those who dare seize it." Mama Ebele said, "It belongs to none who bargain with greed." The crowd shifted uneasily. Amara raised a shell and said, "My ancestors do not bow to smoke." Obasi's laughter rolled like thunder, shaking hearts. Later that night, Amara followed faint chants to the shrine path. She said, "The air hums like bone against stone." Jabari said, "We are watched." The trees seemed to breathe, their bark etched with glowing runes. Kato emerged from darkness, voice sharp, "You chase lies, while Obasi builds a future." Amara said, "His future devours us." Kato's hand gripped his dagger, trembling. "Better devoured with a crown than starved without one," he snapped. Jabari stepped forward, eyes blazing, "Your crown is carved from betrayal." Amara held her hand out and said softly, "Kato, walk with me, not against me." His face twisted in pain, caught between blood and envy. At the hilltop, smoke thickened and formed faces of ancestors crying. Mama Ebele said, "A vow broken calls us here." The sky split with lightning without rain. Amara said, "The shrine demands truth." Jabari raised his spear and said, "Then let truth be defended." Kato shouted, "Truth is whatever hand grips it strongest." Amara faced him, her eyes burning, strength without soul crumbles. The ancestors' faces howled, scattering sparks. Mama Ebele struck her staff into earth and said, "Choose, child of Ukuta, blood or bond." Amara's voice shook, "Bond, though blood claws me apart." Kato turned away, shadow swallowed by flame. The night ended with betrayal cutting deeper than blades. Kato met Obasi at the forest edge, voice low, "I will open her path for you." Obasi smiled coldly, "Ambition makes the sharpest knife." In the village, Amara's chest tightened, though she did not know why. She whispered, "A bond is breaking." Jabari said, "Then we bind it stronger." Mama Ebele stared into the fire, her eyes heavy with sorrow. She said, "When family betrays, the curse grows teeth." The flames bent suddenly, sparks fleeing upward. Amara said, "The shrine waits, and so does truth, but truth may bleed me before I reach it." Her voice carried like a vow swallowed by the dark. The sacred valley opened beneath a sky heavy with dawn mist, its stones carved with forgotten names. Amara said, "This ground breathes with voices older than fire." Jabari touched the carvings and said, "These marks bleed warning." Mama Ebele leaned on her staff and said, "The first trial waits for those who carry more than strength." Kato stood behind, shadows in his eyes, and whispered, "What if the shrine judges us unworthy?" Amara's grip tightened on the shell as she said, "Then it will hear me until I shatter." The air thickened with incense drifting from unseen fires. Jabari said, "No blade cuts smoke, but I will stand in its path." Mama Ebele raised her eyes skyward and said, "Ancestor spirits, witness the return of the seeker." The valley rumbled like a heart awakening. The earth split as a shadow beast with obsidian claws rose from the ground. Jabari roared, "Trial of strength speaks in teeth." He charged, spear clashing against claws that sparked like flint. Amara said, "Do not fight only with arms." She pressed the shell to her chest and whispered, "Guide him." Mama Ebele called out, "Strength is more than muscle, let it flow as bond." Jabari's arms quaked as the beast pressed down. Kato shouted, "He will fall." Amara stepped forward, singing a name etched in the stones, her voice steady. The beast faltered as if chained by sound. Jabari thrust forward with all his might, the beast shattering into dust. He fell to one knee and said, "Your song carried my strike." Amara said, "Your courage carried my voice." The dust cleared, revealing a circle of glowing stones, each inscribed with ancestral names. Mama Ebele said, "Here lies the trial of wisdom." Amara knelt and touched the nearest stone, its glow spilling into her veins. She said, "They speak, but in riddles." Jabari leaned close and said, "Riddles are snares, do not step blindly." Kato muttered, "Better silence than tangled tongues." Mama Ebele placed a shell on the ground and whispered, "Listen, not with ears but with marrow." Amara closed her eyes, the stones pulsing like drum beats in her body. She whispered, "The answer is not mine alone but ours." Jabari placed his hand on hers, steady, while Kato hesitated, then touched the stone. The glow rose, merging into one flame that opened a path of light ahead. The path of light led to an altar where a blade hovered, dripping with unseen blood. Amara said, "This is sacrifice." Mama Ebele said, "Every hero leaves a piece behind." Jabari frowned, "Take my hand instead." Amara shook her head, whispering, "This is mine to give." She cut her palm, the shell drinking the blood. Kato cried, "Do not bleed for ghosts." Amara said, "I bleed for tomorrow." The altar flared, the shell glowing as if alive. Mama Ebele said, "You have given without demand, and the shrine remembers such gifts." The altar softened into light, the wound on Amara's palm sealing, though the pain lingered. Jabari's jaw tightened as he said, "Your sacrifice is a crown I cannot wear for you." Amara whispered, "It is not a crown, it is a promise." At twilight the valley roared with thunder, revealing a hidden stairway descending into darkness. Mama Ebele said, "The shrine is revealed at last." Amara clutched the glowing shell, her heart pounding. She said, "Each trial carved me into its vessel." Jabari adjusted his spear and said, "Then no shadow will turn you back." Kato's face flickered with regret and envy, whispering, "Destiny steals what I longed for." Amara turned to him and said, "It gives what none of us wanted, yet all of us need." Mama Ebele raised her staff and said, "Step into the deep, for the gods wait to measure your soul." The wind howled through the valley as Amara descended first, her shadow stretching long. Jabari followed, unyielding, while Kato lingered in the half-light, torn between love and betrayal. The stairway plunged into a cavern where walls glowed with veins of gold and crimson. Amara whispered, "The shrine breathes like a heart." Jabari scanned the darkness and said, "Every shadow hides teeth." Mama Ebele touched the wall and said, "This place remembers your blood." The shell burned hotter in Amara's hand until she cried out. A voice thundered, "Daughter of the storm, you carry a curse bound at birth." Amara fell to her knees and said, "What curse?" The air shimmered, and her mother's face formed in light, saying, "Your bloodline chained Obasi, and you were marked as his jailer." Kato gasped, "Then she is no heir, but a prison." Jabari growled, "Better prison than tyrant free." Amara trembled, tears streaking, and whispered, "I am both key and lock." Kato stepped back, his voice shaking, "You are the curse itself." Amara rose, her eyes blazing. "I am the guard, not the chain." Jabari said, "Chains break but guards stand." Mama Ebele said, "Your burden is truth, not shame." Kato's fists clenched, torn by envy and fear. He hissed, "If Obasi is chained through her, then he can be freed through her." Amara stepped closer and said, You would offer me to him? Kato turned away, whispering, perhaps freedom for one is worth the death of another. Jabari roared, speak again, and my spear will answer. Mama Ebele lifted her staff and said, do not fight yet, for the shrine is listening. The cavern pulsed as though echoing their anger. The cavern walls split to reveal Obasi, stepping forward clothed in smoke and gold. He said, my jailer walks to me willingly. His voice shook the stone. Amara shouted, I walk to end you. Jabari placed himself before her, spear glowing faintly with reflected fire. Obasi sneered, you defend a vessel cursed to bind me forever. Mama Ebele said, better bound than loosed upon the living. Kato's eyes burned with temptation as Obasi turned to him, saying, help me break her, and you shall rule beside me. Kato wavered, lips trembling. Amara said, do not choose shadow over blood. Kato whispered, blood never chose me. Obasi's laughter rolled like a storm, and the cavern shook. The shell blazed as if aflame, forcing Amara to cry out, I am not your prison, I am your ending. Obasi's eyes widened as fire licked around her hands. Jabari shouted, strike now! He lunged, his spear clashing against Obasi's smoky form. Mama Ebele lifted her staff, chanting, let the curse return to silence. Obasi roared, pushing them back with waves of fire. Kato stood frozen, torn between aiding Amara or yielding to power. Amara said, the shrine does not need my death but my choice. She raised the shell high, its light burning through smoke. Obasi's form cracked like shattered glass. The cavern walls shook, pebbles raining down. Jabari braced against the quake, shouting, end it before he escapes. The smoke cleared, revealing Obasi fractured but not gone. He hissed, your blood keeps me chained, but it also keeps me alive. Amara's chest heaved as she said, then I will live as both cage and key. Mama Ebele said, your destiny was never escape, but balance. Jabari's face hardened. Balance tastes of ash when evil still breathes. Amara said, if I kill him, I kill myself, and the shrine dies with me. Kato whispered, then you are cursed forever. She stepped closer to Obasi and said, I am cursed, but I choose the curse, so you remain bound. Obasi screamed as the shell sealed his form in chains of fire. The cavern stilled, air heavy with silence. Amara fell, exhausted, whispering, balance is bought with blood, not shed. The shrine chamber blazed with the glow of the sealed curse, its walls pulsing like veins of fire. Amara staggered, whispering, the gods demand more than flesh. Jabari caught her arm and said, then they shall hear my oath beside yours. Mama Ebele raised her staff and said, this is the final trial where heart outweighs weapon. Kato lingered at the edge, his face heavy with regret. He said, I betrayed you, yet you still carry me in your blood. Amara faced him, eyes burning with tears, and said, blood cannot be erased, only mended or broken. The chamber shook as chains tightened around Obasi's form, his voice fading into silence. The cavern collapsed inward, forcing them toward the shrine's heart. Amara said, every step is a vow carved in stone. Jabari said, then carve without fear. Mama Ebele whispered, the gods measure not victory, but sacrifice. Kato fell to his knees, tears streaking his cheeks, saying, I would give my name if it would mend what I broke. Amara touched his shoulder and said, redemption is a road, not a word. The path opened into a vast chamber where ancestral spirits circled like flame-lit stars, their voices humming. Amara lifted the shell, saying, I walk not alone, but with all who breathe my name. A figure of pure light emerged, voice layered with thousands of ancestors saying, you bear the curse, yet you bear the choice. Amara trembled but answered, I choose to bind the shadow, even if it binds me. Jabari shouted, no, you are more than chains. Mama Ebele said, her choice is her strength. Kato said, do not walk it alone again. The figure extended a hand, merging the shell's glow with Amara's chest. She gasped as visions of every ancestor poured through her veins. she whispered. I carry their song now, not their silence. The chamber brightened, washing away the shadows. The light dissolved into calm twilight as the shrine walls steadied. Amara stood taller, her wounds gone, her voice stronger. She said, balance is no gift, it is a burden we share. Jabari placed his hand on her shoulder and said, then we will bear it together. Mama Ebele's eyes shone. The gods have written a new path through you. Kato stepped forward, voice trembling. If you still allow me, I will walk behind you, not against you. Amara nodded, then walked beside me. The silence that followed was deep, not empty, but whole. The shrine gates opened, releasing the night air fragrant with earth. They returned to Ukuta as dawn broke, the baobab casting long shadows. Villagers gathered in awe, their eyes wide at the sight of Amara's glowing shell heart. She said, I walked through curse and fire, but I return with balance. The crowd bowed, elders whispering blessings. Jabari said softly, your journey was never yours alone. Mama Ebele said, you have given the people back their voices. Kato lowered his head saying, I will spend my days mending what envy broke. Amara lifted her gaze to the rising sun, whispering, let my steps be a road for those after me. The village breathed as one, their silence heavy with reverence.